I'm back from the Red Hat Summit, and there is a lot to talk about this week. We have a new kernel release with Linux 6.9, which sees a lot of performance perks. There's also some new cool AI stuff from Red Hat that was announced. We're going to unpack some messy drama related to Telegram and Signal. And we have many distro releases to talk about, like Endless OS, Manjaro, and more. So let's dive right into the episode with This Week in Linux, your source for Linux good news. This episode of Twill is sponsored by Kolide. More on them later. Linus Torvalds has announced the latest release of the Linux kernel with Linux 6.9. While Linus is rather nonchalant about this release, like he usually is, there's a lot of exciting stuff in this one to talk about. So let's jump right into it with the highlights. So Linux 6.9 brings a lot of hardware improvements, such as better performance for Intel Core Ultra Meteor Lake. Some AMD performance games are also seen in this release, as well as AMD P-State Preferred Core has been merged for AMD Ryzen Linux users, and Intel Fred was merged, which is an important update for future Intel CPUs that are yet to be released. And also, it's just fun that they have something called Intel Fred. So Linux 6.9, there is a now support for the large frame buffer console fonts on modern 4K displays, which is very nice. Continued preparations for AMD RDNA 3 and RDNA 4 GPUs. The DM Virtual Data Optimizer, or VDO, was finally mainlined, as well as many, many more things. Now, Linus did say there was a few regressions that haven't made it in yet, but none of them look big or worrisome enough to delay the release. And of course, when they do have backports for the fixes, they will put them into the current versions and that sort of stuff. So if you'd like to learn more about the latest news for the latest kernel for Linux, then check out the show notes because there'll be links right there. I recently attended the Red Hat Summit along with Ryan from the Destination Linux podcast, who joined me in Denver, Colorado to see what the Red Hat Summit was all about. On the next episode of Destination Linux, we're going to go in depth on the experience from what was announced by Red Hat, as well as the details of the experience itself. I'm going to give you some quick highlights here on Twill, but be sure to check out the next episode of Destination Linux for the full rundown. So Red Hat shared some big announcements during the first keynote presentation. So Red Hat announced that RHEL AI, which is a foundation model platform for developing and running open source language models. They also announced InstructLab, a community project to enable experts to enhance AI models with their own knowledge. And another announcement they made was RHEL Lightspeed. RHEL Lightspeed aims to simplify development, management, and maintenance, even as your systems grow more complex. Imagine a new security vulnerability is announced. RHEL Lightspeed could alert you with a relevant RHSA, or Red Hat Security Advisory, with the necessary fixes. It can even help you identify affected machines and schedule patching for your next maintenance window, all with simple commands, even if you're not a command line guru. In fact, it uses natural language to do it, which is really cool. Also, RHEL AI combines open source language models, such as the Granite family of models developed by IBM Research, with tools from the InstructLab project to allow customization and enhancements of the models, which basically means you can create your own custom AI system and language model, which is just really, really cool. And of course, since this is Red Hat, these projects are open source, which is very different from most AI projects on the market. So good job there. And there is more to these announcements than we can possibly cover on this show. And if you want to get more details from the coverage of the Red Hat Summit, then check out the podcast Destination Linux by going to destinationlinux.net and subscribing. In a couple of days, the next episode will be out, so you can check it out. But in the meantime, we got some cool stuff you can check out right now at destinationlinux.net. There were also some shenanigans that we got up to in Denver, and we covered that on the podcast as well. That episode comes out Monday morning, so be sure to subscribe. Endless OS 6.0 was released this week with changes to the look and feel of the distro, as well as improved performance. And they also said that they are doubling down on their focus on learning through games. So related to the look and feel, there's a new dark mode that you can do, which is really cool. I'm a big fan of dark mode. There's also improved screenshot and recording tools, as well as updating the core apps. They've also improved performance, so it handles low memory situations better for older hardware. and is related to the learning through games. It includes a collection of game-making apps and creative tools such as, Inkscape and Audacity and that sort of stuff. Also, apps pre-installed that are designed to help teach concepts of coding and game development, which is really cool, and there's a lot of those. I'll have the details in the links in the show notes. For those who are not familiar with Endless OS, they're based on Debian 12, and it's using the GNOME 43 desktop environment. It does include some applications from GNOME 46 that they backported, or not necessarily backported, but they're using in addition to GNOME 43. They're using the Linux 6.5 kernel, which is from Debian, and they have updated to Pipewire 1.0 for better audio, which is really cool to see because Pipewire is fantastic. And they also are using Chromium 124 web browser. They also have this thing called the Endless Key, which is an educational app that is very interesting because the way they handle things is essentially provide a way to curate resources for people to learn various different topics. And it's pretty cool. So if you'd like to learn more about Endless OS, you'll find links in the show notes. This episode of Twill is sponsored by Kolide. Now, Kolide is taking the old approach to endpoint security and just flipping it on its head. The old approach is to lock down employee devices and roll out changes through forced restarts, but it just doesn't work. The IT department is miserable because they've got a mountain of support tickets. Employees start using personal devices just to get their work done, and executives opt out the first time it makes them late for a meeting. You can't have a successful security implementation unless you work with end users, and that's where Kolide comes in. Their user-first device trust solution notifies users as soon as it detects an issue on their device, and it teaches them how to solve it without needing help from IT. That way, untrusted devices are blocked from authenticating, but users don't stay blocked. Kolide is designed for companies with Okta, and it works on macOS, Windows, Linux, and mobile devices. So if you have Okta and you're looking for a device trust solution that respects your team, then visit thisweekinlinux.com/Kolide to watch a demo and see how it works. That's thisweekinlinux.com/KOLIDE. Let's talk about some drama that's happening in the encrypted messaging app space. Well, not exactly, considering Telegram is barely encrypted, but it's Telegram versus Signal. So Telegram's founder, Pavel Durov, decided to blast Signal recently about privacy and security. To put it nicely, though, his comments are rather dumb and ridiculous. So I'm not a security expert or, programming expert or anything like that, but I am an advocate for privacy and security. So I've been following these topics as well as Signal and Telegram for many, many years ago. And I also made a video 3 years ago about encrypted messaging apps. And in that video, I pointed out how Telegram is not really one and barely sort of counts as encrypted, but for the majority of the time, it is not. So it shouldn't even be in the discussion. And the fact that Telegram founder had the nerve to even talk about it at all is kind of hilarious. So let's cover what happened, shall we? Pavel Durov, the founder of Telegram, decided to go on his Telegram channel to talk about Signal, and apparently it's not being secure, which is ridiculous. So he says in his channel, a story shared by Jack Dorsey, the founder of Twitter, uncovered that the current leaders of Signal, an allegedly secure, quote unquote, messaging app, are activists used by the U.S. State Department for regime change abroad. So let's check out what Jack said. Jack said, did not know this. Link to an article. Okay. Did not know what? It's kind of interesting to be sharing an article about an encrypted messaging app and then being very cryptic about your messaging related to it. And then Elon decides to comment on this particular topic. And now, of course, I'm talking about Elon Musk. He says, there are known vulnerabilities with Signal that are not being addressed. Seems odd. That does seem odd, Elon, considering you've provided zero evidence of the such, and all of the known vulnerabilities that have CVEs have been addressed and were addressed quite a long time ago. So it seems like you're wrong. Now, Pavel goes on to say that this story uncovered that the current leaders of Signal, not really, it's a person on the board. That's true, but it's a person on, like, Signal LLC and Signal Foundation are different things, and there's different, and the infrastructure is not as simple as they control Signal sort of thing. So moving on. So it says an allegedly secure messaging app, and you're allegedly secure, not Signal. They say that they are activists used by the U.S. State Department for regime change abroad. Now, this is nonsense because you're taking an article that even says in certain parts, if it's true, then blah, 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 that they're not even confirming. And there's also parts where they're sourcing Twitter posts from 10 years ago, more than 10 years ago, as proof of something because they happen to go to a country and things like that. There's a little bit of conspiracy here, but you're saying that you're saying allegedly secure and are activists. You're making a weird claim here that is unjustified, more so because there's no evidence of that this article is correct, and more so that you're claiming that Telegram is encrypted, which it's not really. He goes on to say that the U.S. government spent $3 million to build Signal's encryption. What? Implying that Signal's encryption was built by the U.S. government, but they gave him a grant, which a lot of companies, thousands of times and over decades, have received grants from the government to do things in various different industries. That does not mean the government controls what was done or whatever, or the government spent this money to build the encryption or whatever. Anyway. Also, it doesn't mean that all grants are therefore controlling the thing that got the grant, because, people in America get grants for college. So you're saying that people are controlled by the government now for that? Everybody who got a grant? That's a lot of people. So that seems a bit ridiculous. Anyway, back to the nonsense. He says, and today the exact same encryption is implemented in WhatsApp, Facebook Messenger, Google Messages, and even Skype. Now, that part's true because it's a good protocol, and a lot of people have agreed that it is, including many cryptographers who have gone over it over the past decade, and they think it's good. So, makes sense that they would use it. How many people are using your protocol? Just you? Okay. Now, back to this. It looks almost as if big tech in the U.S. is not allowed to build its own encryption protocols that would be independent of government interference. Or that is a conspiracy theory based on nonsense, because I've already pointed out that your entire point here is nonsense, because grants doesn't mean that it controls stuff. Okay, let's move on. Then he says an alarming number of important people, of which he's not named at all, that he's spoken to remarked that their private Signal messages had been exploited against them in U.S. courts or media. Who? What? When? Evidence? Sources even? That would be nice. Not provided. Not provided. Ever. Anybody who talks about Signal's security not being up to par or their data being taken or whatever, there's never evidence about it. They just say it and believe me. So when it'd be like, oh, you're trusting Signal. No, they've had open source protocol for a decade, and they have had many people go over that. And you think companies like Facebook and Google and Microsoft would be willing to take a protocol that has not been tested and they need to test themselves? No. Okay. Moving on. He says, but whenever someone raises any doubt about their encryption, Signal's typical response is, we are open source when anyone can verify everything is all right. Now, it's fair to say that open source doesn't necessarily mean it's all right, because it could not be verified. But in the case of Signal, it's been I don't know, a fine-tooth comb, but definitely it has been addressed. It says, unlike Telegram, Signal doesn't allow researchers to make sure that their GitHub code is the same code that is used in the Signal apps that run on users' iPhones. Signal refused to add reproducible builds for iOS, closing a GitHub request from the community. First of all, they do offer reproducible builds for Android, but I'm pretty sure the reason why they did that, they didn't do... Let's go and check it out. Let's check it out. I'm pretty sure, I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure the reason why that they closed the request is because it's not possible. Like that Apple does extra stuff that makes that not possible. So let's look. Okay, so I've got some context here. This was closed because they moved feature request from GitHub to their forum. And he's promoting this as if it's closed because they refused to do it. They just they closed it because they moved all their feature requests to a forum. So that seems a bit disingenuous, I guess, at least. So also on this page where the forum happens, they talked about the fact that iOS, like with Android, it's already there, but with iOS, it's hard to do because it would require a jailbroken iPhone. And every time iOS makes a new version, they break jailbreaks, so it's a very complicated system to do. And even though Telegram does it, you still can't do it on the latest version of iOS every time that comes out. So it's not really practical to even offer, even with Telegram. So it's interesting, but they closed it because they moved their feature requests to a forum. And you're presenting it as if they closed it by refusal. And then following that part, Pavel says that, and WhatsApp doesn't even publish the code of its apps. So all their talk about privacy is even more obvious circus trick. Okay. Interesting point that is entirely irrelevant because WhatsApp is not the subject of the conversation. It's Signal, not WhatsApp. Yes, WhatsApp uses Signal, but that has nothing to do with Signal. So irrelevant. Good try to, pass the buck there. Goes on to say that Telegram is the only massively popular messaging service that allows everyone to make sure that all of its apps indeed use the same open reproducible build, blah, blah. Also not necessarily true because you still need a jailbroken iPhone. You can't use the latest iPhone. As we already talked about that. Then it says, for the past 10 years, Telegram secret chats have remained the only popular method of communication that is verifiably private. It's not verifiably private because you have a protocol that is exclusive to you and requires people to continuously audit the code, which Signal does have continuous auditing from a lot of different places. I don't know how recent it has been, but there's been a lot of auditing on that thing. And you're talking about the whole verifying based on the reproducible builds, but that's also kind of not true because of the jailbroken iPhone and the latest iOS and all that sort of stuff. But here's the most important piece to take away from this. This is the Telegram CEO talking about secure apps for messaging. That's not Telegram. By default, Telegram is not encrypted at all. If you want to have encryption, even the little bit they offer, you have to start a secret chat manually with someone. And if you want to have more than one person in that secret chat, well, you can't. It's a one-to-one. So if you want to have a group chat and you want it to be encrypted, you can't use Telegram at all. If you want to have a large group of people in that, you can't use Telegram at all. If you want to have a conversation with one person using their phone and another person using their laptop, you can't because it's not a part of Telegram. The secret chats do not work on the laptops and desktops. Last time I checked, they probably still don't. I haven't checked in like since last year, but I would be shocked if they changed this because it's been the same for years and years. The secret chat is super limited to one-to-one conversations on a smartphone, or I guess a tablet too. Yay. Basically the same OS. So if you're using Android or using iOS, then you can use it. Otherwise, it is completely unencrypted, plain text data on their servers, which are proprietary. So is it that great? It's kind of funny when I saw this, what are you even talking about? There's drama. There's a battle between Telegram and Signal. And I'm like, no, there's not. Telegram is in no way competing against Signal with encryption and security and privacy. Telegram instantly loses purely by the fact that default, it is unencrypted. Signal, default, encrypted. Therefore, Signal better. But also, even if you go into the details of the encryption in Telegram, it's not very good. It's super limited. So, yeah. This is some really weird drama, but I thought it was funny. That's why I covered it on the show. But yeah, if you're looking for an encrypted a messaging app, then Signal, clearly. There is a new release of Fedora Asahi Linux Remix. This is based on Fedora 40. This is the version of Fedora Linux that is optimized to run on Apple Silicon ARM systems. And Fedora Asahi Remix continues to be one of the best ways to enjoy Linux experience on an M-chip Apple Mac. Now, this is related to the M1, M2, M3 powered devices. And it's really cool because Asahi Linux has been working around for many years to get this to be done. And Fedora Asahi Remix is a solid option for those, and actually kind of like the flagship for Asahi Linux. So with the Fedora Asahi Remix 40 release, there is now conformant OpenGPL 4.6 support thanks to the upgraded Mesa drivers. There's also improved device compatibility with its newer kernel, and it also has KDE Plasma 6 upgraded. And KDE Plasma is the default desktop environment for their flagship, but they also give you an option for GNOME variant, which uses the GNOME 46. And if you'd like to learn more and check it out for yourself, you'll find links in the show notes. I don't know if you're familiar with Destination Linux podcast or not, but if you're not, you need to check it out, especially the latest episode where we interviewed GloriousEggroll. For those who don't know who that is a developer who has been helping the gaming part of Linux for a very long time. He makes the Proton-GE, which is the GE for GloriousEggroll. Then there's also the Nobara project. There's the Umu project. He works on Lutris and a bunch of other stuff. So go check out the latest episode of Destination Linux 370. That'll be linked in the show notes. And it's just a really fantastic interview. And also be sure to subscribe to the show because it's a fantastic show that I happen to also be on. So if you like this one, you're going to like that one too. Link in the show notes. There's a new version of Manjaro this week with Manjaro 24. This is based on the Arch Linux distribution, and this is codename Wednesday, I think. It's a very interesting way of spelling Wednesday, but I think it's that. This release has updated desktop environments with GNOME 46, KDE Plasma 6.0, and XFCE 4.18, although that one's not necessarily updated because that's been the same version for quite a while. Not necessarily in Manjaro, just XFCE in general. Now, they also have updated support for the latest hardware thanks to the kernel 6.9 that we just talked about. It also has updated the NVIDIA drivers and various other software as well. And there's also some stuff related to the Manjaro's new gaming edition, which is pretty interesting because they're doing it with the Orange Pi. It's a custom handheld thing that's working alongside with the Manjaro team. And I'm very excited to see that, but it's not out yet. So it's coming later this year. So I'm looking forward to that. And if you'd like to learn more about the latest release of Manjaro, you'll find links in the show notes. There's a new version of Rescuezilla, Rescuezilla 2.5, which is a system recovery tool using Clonezilla, and it is based on Ubuntu 24.04 with this release. There are also options for 23.10 and 23.04 for some reason if you want to use that, but that's pretty cool. Now, this release of Rescuezilla 2.5 has better Btrfs support or BTRFS support that is updated part clone for 0.3.27 to improve backups on Btrfs file systems. They've also introduced an experimental command line interface, which adds basic backup, verify, restore, and clone operations. But again, it is experimental, so keep that in mind. Also, there's various other improvements like preventing laptops from sleeping during recovery, better handling of MD RAID devices with MBR partitions, improved restore clone operations in Portuguese, as well as continues image scanning after errors are found, which is basically skips irrelevant permission warnings and that sort of thing. So various different improvements to the Rescuezilla distribution. If you'd like to learn more, you'll find links in the show notes. Up next is a new release of a browser. And we're not talking about Chrome or Chromium or Firefox or Vivaldi or anything else. We're talking about one you may have never heard of, and that's called Dillo, with Dillo 3.1. And this is the first release in 9 years. They've added support for floating HTML elements. They've added support for OpenSSL, LibreSSL, and MBED TLS for HTTPS handling, inline HTML button support, support for more CSS properties, automatic HTML rendering tests, improved documentation, and a variety of other enhancements. Now, for those who are not familiar with Dillo, it makes sense because this is the first time they've released a new version in 9 years. But also, it's a very, very specific kind of browser. It is a super lightweight, incredibly lightweight. In fact, it doesn't have support for a lot of things. And this version is the first time it had support for HTTPS, which is required now these days, basically. So it's good that this has been updated to include that. But I also don't really get why it's a thing. Because I was introduced to Dillo through the Nano Linux distribution because this was based on Tiny Core Nano Linux. And the whole goal of Nano Linux was to be as small as possible. So you could have an entire system running with only 14 megs of RAM needed. Yes, 14 megs. And it was kind of crazy because it could do a lot of stuff. It had a browser, which was Dillo. But then I saw how stripped down it was because of all these different things. And the Dillo browser really only had support for HTML2, which means a lot of websites don't work, and especially if they're JavaScript heavy and that sort of thing. So I'm not really sure what the target audience of Dillo is, but it's kind of fun that it exists, and it's kind of fun that it's back and has support for HTTPS and that sort of thing. So I don't know. If you want to check it out, you can find links in the show notes, although it does require compilation right now. So if you are not familiar with doing that, you might have to wait until some distribution that you're using decides to package it, if they do. So there's that. Thanks for watching this episode of This Week in Linux. If you like what I do here on this show and want to be kept up to date with what's going on in the Linux and open source world, then be sure to subscribe. And of course, remember to like that smash button. If you'd like to support the show and the Tux Digital Network, then consider becoming a patron by going to tuxdigital.com/membership, where you can get a bunch of cool perks like access to the patron-only section of our Discord server and much, much more. You can also support the show by ordering the Linux Everywhere t-shirt or the This Week in Linux shirt at tuxdigital.com/store. Plus, while you're there, check out all the other cool stuff we got, like hats, mugs, hoodies, and a lot more at tuxdigital.com/store. I'll see you next time for your source for Linux news. Thanks again for watching. I'm Michael Tennell. I hope you're doing swell. Be sure to ring that notification bell. And until next time, I bid you farewell.